The sound of the siren shattered the quiet afternoon like a gunshot.
This is my property and
Neighbors
I won't
stepped
stand
onto their
for it.
porches, phones already raised, curiosity lighting their faces. A woman stood at the end of our driveway, arms crossed, lips curled in satisfaction. She had made the call. And she believed she had already won. What she didn't know was that this single phone call would destroy her authority forever. It started as a normal Sunday. My wife and I were unpacking groceries, laughing about something trivial, when the unmistakable voice of the HOA president echoed down the street. She marched toward us like she owned the ground beneath her feet, clipboard pressed against her chest, sunglasses hiding eyes full of judgment. She didn't greet us. She didn't ask questions. She issued orders. According to her, my wife didn't belong here. Her paperwork was invalid. Our presence was a violation. The words came fast, sharp, and loud enough for half the block to hear. I tried to respond calmly, but she cut me off, raising her voice higher, feeding off the attention gathering around us. Then she did it. She stepped back, pulled out her phone, and announced loudly that she was calling 911 to have my wife removed from the property. Removed. Like a criminal. Like she didn't have the right to stand on her own front lawn. The confidence in her voice was chilling. This wasn't a bluff. She truly believed the police would arrive and obey her command. My wife stayed silent. No arguing. No explaining. Just a slow, measured breath, and a look in her eyes I'd seen before, calm, focused, almost curious. She gently squeezed my hand and whispered, "Let her call." When the police dispatcher answered, the HOA Karen's tone shifted into practiced victimhood. She claimed trespassing. Disorderly conduct. Threats. Each lie stacked carefully on the last. She paced while speaking, glancing at us with smug triumph, certain she had complete control. But as the sirens grew closer, something changed. My wife straightened her posture. She adjusted her jacket. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't going to end the way that woman imagined. Because the officers arriving weren't just responding to a complaint. They were unknowingly walking into a reckoning. The patrol cars rolled in slowly, tires crunching against the gravel, lights flashing just enough to draw a crowd without sounding the siren again. Two officers stepped out, calm and professional, scanning the scene the way seasoned cops do when they know there's more to the story than the caller admitted. The HOA Karen rushed toward them immediately, clipboard now clutched like evidence in a courtroom. She spoke fast, loud, and overconfident. She pointed at my wife as if presenting a criminal she had personally apprehended. Trespassing, she said. Refusal to comply. Illegal residency. Each accusation came with dramatic pauses, clearly rehearsed for moments like this. She made sure to mention her position, repeating HOA president as though it were a law enforcement rank. The officers listened politely, nodding, asking a few basic questions. One of them glanced toward us, then back at her, clearly noticing the disconnect between her outrage and our calm. When they finally approached my wife, the energy shifted. Conversations nearby lowered. Phones were raised higher. Everyone sensed something important was about to happen. "Ma'am," one officer said carefully, "can I see your identification?" My wife handed it over without hesitation. The officer looked down at the card. His eyes paused. Then narrowed. He checked it again, slower this time. His partner leaned in, curiosity replacing boredom. The first officer straightened slightly, his posture changing in a way only other officers would recognize. Respect crept into his voice, unforced and immediate. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. That was all. The HOA Karen noticed it instantly. Her confident smile faltered. "What's going on?" she demanded. "She's the problem. Why are you talking to her like that?" The second officer cleared his throat and asked my wife if she'd like them to handle the situation formally or discreetly. That single question sucked the air out of the street. Neighbors exchanged confused looks. Someone whispered, "What does that mean?" My wife met the officer's eyes. "Let's keep it professional," she replied evenly. The HOA Karen laughed nervously, waving her hand. "This is ridiculous. Just remove her. I called you for a reason." The first officer finally turned to her fully. His voice was still calm, but now it carried weight. He explained that my wife was not only legally allowed to be there, but that the call itself might constitute misuse of emergency services. The word misuse hit hard. Faces in the crowd shifted from curiosity to shock. The HOA Karen's mouth opened, then closed. She looked around, searching for validation, for support, for anything familiar. But the street felt different now. Quieter. Heavier. She was no longer in control. And she still had no idea just how powerful the person she tried to evict truly was. The HOA Karen's voice wavered as she tried to laugh it off, but no sound came out. She folded her arms again, a defensive reflex, and repeated that she knew her rights and that this neighborhood had standards. The words felt hollow now, bouncing uselessly off the growing silence. Even the birds seemed to pause, as if waiting. One of the officers asked her to step aside so they could clarify a few details. She hesitated, clearly unused to being told what to do, then complied with sharp, angry steps. Her confidence hadn't vanished yet, but it was cracking, thin lines spreading beneath the surface. Meanwhile, the second officer quietly asked my wife if she'd like him to notify command about the situation. That single word landed differently this time. Command. A neighbor gasped audibly. Someone else muttered, "What's going on?" My wife nodded once. "Yes," she said. "Let them know where you are." The officer stepped away and spoke into his radio, his tone precise and respectful. He stated her full name. That's when everything stopped. The radio crackled back almost instantly. His posture stiffened, shoulders back, chin raised. His partner froze mid-step. The officer answered with a sharp "Yes, sir," then lowered the radio slowly, as if the weight of the moment required care. The HOA Karen noticed the shift and rushed back toward them. "What did you just say?" she demanded. "Who did you call?" The officer turned to her, expression firm but controlled. "Ma'am, please lower your voice." "I will not," she snapped. "This is my neighborhood. I have authority here." The officer took a breath. "Not like this," he said. Then he explained carefully, professionally, that my wife was not just a resident, not just legally present, but someone whose authority extended far beyond the boundaries of the HOA. Far beyond the street. Far beyond anything she controlled. My wife finally spoke again. Calm. Measured. Unemotional. She confirmed her role, not as a threat, not as a flex, but as a fact. A simple truth that didn't need embellishment. The HOA Karen's face drained of color. She shook her head. "That's not possible," she whispered. "You're lying." The officer didn't argue. He simply nodded toward the patrol car, where a tablet screen now displayed my wife's credentials in unmistakable clarity. The title. The seal. The jurisdiction. A murmur rippled through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. The HOA Karen staggered back a step. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was humiliation unfolding in real time. And the consequences were only just beginning. The street no longer felt like a neighborhood. It felt like a courtroom with no walls. Every porch, every driveway, every open window had become a seat for witnesses. The HOA Karen stood at the center of it all, suddenly aware that every word she had spoken, every order she had barked, now echoed back at her with consequences attached. She tried to recover. Even if that's true, she said shakily, HOA rules still apply. No one is above them. Her voice rose again, desperate to reclaim control. This is private property. You can't intimidate me with badges. The officer's response was immediate. Calm. Final. He explained that no one was intimidating her. That the law was simply being clarified. And that her 911 call, based on false claims, had escalated the situation beyond HOA authority entirely. My wife listened without expression. When she finally spoke, every eye locked onto her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten. She simply asked one question: do you understand what a false emergency report is? The HOA Karen swallowed hard. The officer took over, outlining it clearly how misuse of emergency services could result in fines, charges, and documentation that follows a person for years. The clipboard slipped from her hands and hit the pavement with a hollow clack. No one moved to help her pick it up. A neighbor stepped forward cautiously, admitting this wasn't the first time she'd overstepped. Another added that she'd threatened people before. One by one, stories surfaced. Warnings. Intimidation. Calls that never should have been made. The officers listened. Notes were taken. The HOA Karen spun toward the crowd. You're all turning on me now, she cried. After everything I've done for this community. Silence answered her. My wife didn't look at the neighbors. She looked only at the officers. I want this documented, she said. No special treatment. Handle it by the book. Those words hit harder than any threat ever could. The officers nodded, professionalism locking in. One began explaining the next steps. A report. A citation. Possible follow-up. The HOA Karen's breathing grew shallow, her earlier bravado completely gone. She glanced at my wife again, eyes wide with disbelief. You could stop this, she whispered. My wife met her gaze. You stopped being in control when you decided to abuse it. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They just watched as accountability finally arrived, quiet and unavoidable. And as the officers continued writing, one thing became painfully clear to everyone present. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. The HOA Karen sat on the curb now, no longer pacing, no longer arguing. Her shoulders slumped as if the weight of the entire afternoon had finally settled on her chest. The clipboard lay abandoned where it had fallen, papers scattered by a light breeze that felt almost symbolic. Authority, once flaunted, now meant nothing. One officer calmly explained the citation she was receiving. Another confirmed her information. Everything was procedural, methodical, and painfully slow for someone who had spent years rushing others with threats and ultimatums. Each word spoken by the police sounded like a nail being driven into the coffin of her self-made power. Neighbors continued to gather, no longer hiding behind curtains. They stood openly now, some whispering, others simply watching. A few exchanged looks that said, "We warned you." For the first time, the HOA Karen had no audience cheering her on, only witnesses. She tried once more to appeal directly to my wife. You don't have to do this, she said quietly, voice cracking. We can just forget it happened. My wife didn't respond right away. She looked at the houses lining the street, at the people who had lived under this woman's rule for years. Then she turned back. This isn't about me, she said. It's about what happens when people think power means permission. That ended the conversation. The officer informed the HOA Karen that further contact with us could be considered harassment. Any retaliation through the HOA would be documented. Any additional misuse of emergency services would carry heavier consequences. Each sentence stripped another layer of protection she thought she had. Someone in the crowd finally spoke up. Does this mean she's not in charge anymore? The officer chose his words carefully. That's up to the HOA board. but this incident will be included in the record. That was enough. The realization hit her all at once. This wasn't just embarrassment. This was the beginning of the end. Board reviews. Complaints. Paper trails. The kind of accountability that doesn't disappear when the patrol cars leave. As the officers prepared to wrap up, one of them quietly thanked my wife for handling the situation professionally. She nodded, accepting it not as praise, but as confirmation that she'd done exactly what was right. When the patrol cars finally pulled away, the street stayed silent. No one rushed to the HOA Karen. No one offered comfort. She stood alone, surrounded by the consequences of her own choices. And in that moment, stripped of her title, her threats, and her imagined control, she looked like what she had always been underneath it all. Just another resident. Long after the patrol cars disappeared, the street remained unnaturally quiet. It wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet, it was the kind that follows something irreversible. Doors stayed open. Neighbors lingered in small clusters, processing what they had just witnessed. The HOA Karen, once the loudest presence on the block, walked away alone without a word. That evening, messages began circulating. Group chats that had once been silent suddenly buzzed with cautious honesty. People shared screenshots of past warnings, fines, and threats. Patterns emerged. What had felt personal to each household now looked systemic. For the first time, residents realized they weren't isolated. They had all been managed through fear. My wife and I sat at our kitchen table, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows across the floor. She finally exhaled, the tension she'd held all day easing. "This is usually how it goes," she said quietly. "People don't realize abuse of power until it's undeniable." I asked if she regretted not stopping it earlier, not revealing who she was before the call. She shook her head. "Then it would have been about me," she said. "This way, it's about her choices." The next morning, the HOA board meeting was suddenly rescheduled. Emergency agenda. Mandatory attendance. That alone spoke volumes. By noon, rumors spread that legal counsel had been contacted. By evening, an official notice appeared in inboxes, reminding residents of proper procedures and warning against misuse of authority. No names were mentioned. None were needed. A neighbor knocked on our door that night, bringing cookies and an apology for not speaking up sooner. Another followed. Then another. Each conversation carried the same theme: relief mixed with regret. The illusion had shattered, and people were recalibrating what normal should look like. My wife listened patiently. She didn't lecture. She didn't boast. She simply encouraged them to document everything going forward. Accountability, she reminded them, only works when people participate in it. Across the street, the HOA Karen's house stayed dark. Days passed. No new notices. No warnings. No letters slipped into mailboxes. The absence of her presence felt louder than her old threats ever had. And slowly, something unfamiliar took its place. Peace. But beneath it was tension, too. Because everyone knew the story wasn't over yet. Paperwork moved slowly. Boards deliberate. Consequences unfold in stages. What had ended was the illusion of untouchability. What was beginning was something far more uncomfortable. Change. The HOA meeting room was packed in a way it hadn't been in years. Folding chairs scraped against the floor as residents filled every inch of space, standing along walls, crowding the doorway. No one was smiling. This wasn't gossip hour. This was accountability knocking, and everyone could feel it. The HOA Karen arrived late. She walked in stiffly, eyes fixed straight ahead, clutching a folder like a shield. The confidence she once wore so comfortably was gone, replaced by tight shoulders and shallow breaths. Conversation stopped when she entered. Not out of respect but finality. The board called the meeting to order. Formalities dragged, heavy and awkward, until public comments opened. That's when the dam broke. One resident stood and described years of selective enforcement. Another followed, detailing threats over minor violations. Screenshots were projected. Emails read aloud. Dates, times, patterns. What once felt like isolated incidents now formed a clear, undeniable picture. The HOA Karen tried to interrupt. She was warned. She tried again. This time, she was silenced. The board's legal advisor spoke next, outlining the seriousness of abusing authority and involving emergency services without cause. Liability. Exposure. Risk. Words that made board members shift uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't just about one call anymore, it was about protecting the association from itself. When the HOA Karen was finally allowed to speak, her voice shook. She claimed misunderstandings, stress, passion for the community. She avoided the word 9/11 entirely. No apology followed. No ownership. Just excuses carefully chosen to minimize damage. It didn't work. A vote was called. Temporary suspension pending investigation. The result was unanimous. The sound in the room wasn't applause. It was exhalation. Relief moving through dozens of people at once. The HOA Karen sat frozen as the decision was read into record, her folder slipping from her hands just like the clipboard days before. Outside, residents lingered, talking openly now. Plans formed. Committees volunteered. Rules discussed. For the first time, participation replaced fear. The community wasn't just watching change happen, they were shaping it. When we got home, my wife stood quietly on the porch, looking down the street she'd walked so calmly during the storm. I asked her how it felt. She thought for a moment. Power doesn't disappear, she said. It just moves to where people are willing to be responsible with it. The lights across the neighborhood glowed warm that night. And somewhere behind one dark window, a former authority finally understood what it meant to be held accountable. The neighborhood woke up lighter the next morning. Not louder. Not celebratory. Just lighter, like a pressure system had finally moved on. People waved again. Conversations lingered at mailboxes. Kids played a little longer outside. Nothing official had changed yet, but everything felt different. The HOA sent out another notice. This one acknowledged the suspension without naming names, emphasizing transparency, revised procedures, and community input. Words like oversight and checks appeared for the first time. It wasn't an apology, but it was close enough to signal fear of repeating history. Across the street, the HOA Karen's curtains stayed closed. Her car didn't move. The house felt sealed off from the world she once ruled. When she finally appeared days later, it was brief, head down, steps quick, no clipboard in sight. No one confronted her. No one needed to. Consequences have a way of speaking for themselves. My wife returned to her routine. Calls. Meetings. Briefings. From the outside, nothing about her suggested authority. That was always the point. Power, she believed, should never announce itself unless absolutely necessary. What mattered more was what happened after it was used. Neighbors continued stopping by, not with apologies anymore, but with questions. How to file complaints properly. How to attend board meetings. How to document issues without escalating them into conflicts. My wife answered carefully, never positioning herself as a savior, only as someone who understood systems and their limits. One evening, a teenager from down the block asked her if being in charge of the state police felt powerful. She smiled gently. It feels heavy, she said. Because every decision echoes. That lesson settled quietly into the street. The investigation moved forward. Emails were requested. Records reviewed. Past warnings resurfaced. The HOA board grew visibly cautious, consulting legal counsel before taking even minor actions. Fear had shifted from residents to leadership and balance began to return. Weeks later, a final notice arrived. New elections scheduled. Mandatory ethics training. Revised enforcement policies. It was the kind of message that only comes after something goes very wrong. The street absorbed it calmly. Late one night, my wife and I walked together under the soft glow of streetlights. I asked her if she thought the HOA Karen understood what she'd done now. She understands the result, my wife said. Whether she understands the reason, that takes longer. The wind moved through the trees, carrying away the last echoes of sirens that no longer felt threatening. The story wasn't about power anymore. It was about what remains after it's misused. And what grows when accountability finally arrives? Months later, the neighborhood looked the same, but it lived differently. Rules were still posted. Lawns were still trimmed. Meetings still happened. But the fear was gone, replaced by something far more durable: trust earned slowly and carefully. The HOA Karen never returned to power. When elections came, her name wasn't on the ballot. No announcement explained why. None was needed. Her absence spoke louder than any statement ever could. The house across the street eventually went up for sale, the sign appearing one quiet morning without ceremony. Life moved forward. New board members took their roles seriously, not as rulers but as stewards. Meetings opened with transparency. Disagreements were handled openly. No one rushed to authority. No one reached for threats. The lesson had embedded itself deep into the culture of the street. My wife remained what she had always been: steady, composed, invisible unless needed. Very few people ever mentioned her role again. They didn't need to. What mattered wasn't who she was, but what the moment had taught everyone about respect, restraint, and responsibility. One afternoon, a moving truck pulled away from the former HOA Karen's driveway. Curtains came down. The door closed for the last time. No one watched. No one whispered. The chapter ended not with confrontation, but with quiet finality. That night, as we sat on our porch, I asked my wife if she'd ever think about that day again: the call, the sirens, the crowd. She nodded. Only as a reminder, she said. That authority should protect people, not intimidate them. The street lights flickered on one by one. Children laughed somewhere down the block. A dog barked. Normal sounds, returned and reclaimed. What started as an attempt to evict someone had instead exposed something much larger. A misuse of power. A community held hostage by fear. And the truth that real authority doesn't need to shout. It waits. It listens. And when it speaks, it does so not to punish, but to correct. The HOA Karen thought she controlled the neighborhood. She was wrong. What truly held power was accountability, quietly watching, patient, and inevitable. And once unleashed, it never needed sirens again.